Welcome to the Teach Better Talk podcast, your official podcast for the Teach Better Podcast Network, the hub for all things education, brought to you by teachbetter.com. The Teach Better Talk podcast is committed to answering your burning questions through a variety of lenses and bringing new offers to you and your colleagues to help you thrive throughout the school year. My name is Ray Hewart, and we love your questions here on the pod. If you have any questions that you'd love us to consider as topics for future episodes, please share them with us by emailing info@teachbetter.com. What are the safe on-ramps for discussing race in our schools and our school districts? This is going to be a really interesting conversation, and I'm so glad we have our guest here to dive into this. Before we get too far in, I do want to give a huge shout out to Jeff Gargas, our COO and co-founder of the Teach Better team. He is somebody I always lean on when anytime I need to have a tough conversation with anyone. He's my brainstorm buddy. And so as we discuss safety this week, creating safe spaces, I always want to kind of lean on my go-to people. And I'm definitely going to give a shout out to Jeff Gargas, definitely being a go-to person for that. A new go-to person that I will absolutely be leaning on for the rest of my career is our incredible guest. Ruben is here to discuss not only some amazing insight for us to soak in for today's episode, but also a resource that I believe all of us should have bookmarked on our computers and should be leaning into as we move in this direction, discussing safe spaces in our classrooms and also discussing how to facilitate discussions about race and other tough conversations in our classroom. Ruben, how are you feeling today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Good. I'm so thrilled that you found time to come on the pod and discuss what I know many educators are going to shy away from. This is a tough conversation to dive into, and you do it for a living.
Yeah, no. Thanks for giving me the space to do this. I'm happy to be here.
So excited. For those people who might be listening and may not be familiar with all the work you're doing in this space, I know the multitude of resources you have on your website. Would you share a little bit about what you do, who you are, kind of all that jazz?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a professor of English. I specialize in Shakespeare studies. I'm also the director of the Arizona Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies, which is a mouthful. And I always fear, when I give that title, that people will imagine the stuffiest of places, right? With old books, and dust. But it's actually, the work we're doing here is pretty field changing in terms of focusing on critical race studies and how we can imagine the pre-modern past through that lens. And so it's not an exaggeration to say it's been field shifting, and there's a lot more attention in Shakespeare and early modern studies and thinking about how we see and imagine race and racial formations in that period. So it's been fun, and more importantly, I think, we are all invested in issues of social justice. So
how do you get into this work? Because I know so many people are going to be wondering, okay, wait, so you maybe were a lit major, and then how did you get into then this being your full-time practice, being such not only an advocate, but really being in this space full-time?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I will say I need to kind of give my flowers while I still can here, right? To those who came before me, there's a genealogy of critical race scholars who've done great work, and who really brought the field to where it is. So, when people talk about race studies, it's been happening for about 60 years. It's just for a long period of that time, people were not listening. And so it was, deliberate gatekeeping and keeping these scholars and conversations out of, the central view of what the field is. So for me, that's a good question. I think I was very much like, I cut my teeth as a traditional scholar. I was looking at, the history of religion. And as a result, there was a moment when I was thinking about hospitality, and it got to a point where I started seeing this theme. And so after I finished my first book, I wanted to explore this further. And so I started looking at immigration and issues of hospitality. And it was around that time that I was back home in El Paso, Texas, long before the We Built the Wall movement. But big iron fence was going up, and the city of my childhood, it seemed like a big symbol of inhospitality. And so as I was studying immigration in the early modern past and working with scholars, it kind of opened my eyes to think about how anti-immigrant sentiments, right, that were in place in Shakespeare's England, right, persist to the present moment, and that felt personal to me. And so, yeah, the long answer to your question is it felt personal, and I felt like we could use the literature we study as a vehicle to address these issues.
Wow, that's such a beautiful connection to not only something that you became very passionate about, but then something that also hit very close to home. When I think of discussing race in schools, I won't lie to you. This is where I just really shy away from conversations. And this whole week, I think I'm going to feel that way when we're discussing safety. Like, I am the sit back and listen kind of person because I just have nothing to give. I feel like in this space, I feel like I'll say something wrong, I'll give bad advice. Like, I just get so nervous in this space. And I assume others must feel that way. Do you ever feel that way?
Oh, to be certain here, I think, most of us experience that in the classroom and in schools, right? And how is my perspective going to resonate with people who are not like me, who don't look like me, who don't have the same backgrounds? And so I think what you're suggesting is spot on. And unfortunately, it is interconnected, right? So conversations about race and one's safety are sometimes, kind of go hand in hand. But as you suggest, I think I first of all, thank you for your candor, right? I mean, this is most classrooms are like this. Most students just feel like ill-equipped, and the truth is that most students, including myself as a student, right, were ill-equipped. We're just not taught nor given that racialized vocabulary at the age we should. And people often say middle school's too early to be talking about this, high school's too early to be talking about this. I wholeheartedly disagree. I think these conversations need to begin early and honestly, yeah, so people feel comfortable talking about them.
Well, and the beauty of this is that as you're listening to this podcast, friends, the hope would be that whether you are bringing it up as an educator, maybe in your lesson plan or not, and it just is coming up organically, you will hopefully feel prepared and like you have resources to lean on by the end of this episode. And that's really what we want to make sure you have for you is, do you have the resources in your toolkit if you need them, or when you need them to be able to reach for. Ruben, something I really valued about how we were discussing this topic prior to pressing recording is talking about the safe on-ramps that educators have the opportunity to lean on. So we're going to get into that here in just a minute on the pod. Before we do, I do want to hear a little bit more about you as a person, you in your day-to-day life. Tell us a little bit about where you're living, what your work looks like being a professor.
Yeah, so I'm in Tempe, Arizona at the ASU, and it's my day to day right now is very much focused on the center itself. It's a full-time job. I'm also the president of the Shakespeare Association of America, and so that is somewhat time consuming. So it feels like it's all Shakespeare all the time. So there's a lot of that, but it's a great community here, and the center, I think, because of the type of work that we're doing, the whole team here is amazing. So I really value coming in. Everyone's focused and really committed to these issues of social justice. So they see what we're doing. I mean, in a period when critical race studies is being outlawed, right, where legislation is being passed, we are on the front lines and really kind of putting ourselves out there. And we this is all supported by, two major Mellon grants that invested in the work that we're doing. And so I think every member here feels fortunate in recognizing that work is being supported. At the same time, I think recognizing the precarity of the current moment is tricky, but by and large, I mean, yeah, it's great. My teaching load is smaller than it used to be because of the administrative work, but I work with great students. I'm teaching a class on Shakespeare now, and I mean, this is always such my favorite part of this, right? Is learning from the students and seeing what they bring to the table and letting me see what I study, with fresh eyes and fresh perspectives. So I can't complain. Yeah, it's sunny, and it'll be not triple digit weather soon enough.
Yeah, amen for that. I know it can get hot over in Arizona. Huge shout out for ASU. They also have a great online program for those of you that might have kids looking at college opportunities, or if those of you are looking for a master's program, ASU is a great opportunity for those of you looking. Let's get into our question. Ruben, stick with us. We're going to get into our leading question here. We'll be right back.
Quick pause to give a shout out to the Teach Better blog. Head over to teachbetter.com/blog to read articles from guest bloggers all over the world sharing their ideas, whether it be classroom strategies, leadership ideas, fundraiser tools and tricks, or anything in between to reach all of your learners. Head over to teachbetter.com/blog to get reading.
What are those safe on-ramps that we as educators can use to discuss race in our schools and in our districts? Ruben is here to discuss that with us. As we are discussing this topic, Ruben, what comes up as a good place for us to start?
Ray, I think you kind of gestured at that earlier when you said, I feel uncomfortable talking about race. I think it is okay to be honest. And as educators, I think we always have the, mentality that we are the experts in the room, right? We're in the front of the room and we're the ones who know all about this. And it's okay to say, look, I'm not the expert on race, right? But I do want to create and foster an environment where we can talk about this candidly, right? Honestly, and also, emphasizing that it should be a safe space to have these particular conversations. So if you model that, and if you're able to suggest your own vulnerability in that moment, I think it goes a long way for the defensiveness of students, maybe for their own sense of vulnerability, right? To give way to the possibility of having these conversations.
Yeah, I think that is a beautiful element of teaching, is educators trying to find the balance of sharing vulnerability, sharing elements of their lives, and sharing stories of their lives so that their students truly can get to know them as people.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think adding the personal to that is critical. Another way in, I think, is also not coming in, full fledged and saying, let's look at this head on, but to think about what are some of the structures that the literature shows us that might be in place here, right? That we can think about that then maybe support other structures that make it possible to have, systems of racism that are in place. So, I often talk about gender first because I think students are way more comfortable talking about the inequality, of gender and gendered hierarchies that existed in Shakespeare's time and persist to our own moment, right? That seems to be something that they are willing to engage with, and then to turn it on its head and to say, okay, when we think about that hierarchy, who sits atop that hierarchy? And typically that is the same element that then governs how we think about racial hierarchies, right? So let's look at that. And then students are able to see that, it's these particular beliefs, right, that kind of forge the notion of some individuals being superior to others, right?
So organically, this may come up if we are reading certain texts in an English class, if we are reading certain texts in a social studies class. This might be relevant if we're watching the news. This might be relevant depending on even what we're reading in a math and science class, this could be something that we're choosing to pull in and really dive in to enrich the text with any students to be able to have some good discussion around even just the time period of where the author would be living if they were from a different era or from maybe even more recent times.
Yeah, absolutely right. And, I can give you an example, I think, from a play that's probably everybody comes across at some point in their lives, right? It's Romeo and Juliet. It's part of the curriculum in the United States, usually freshman year, people come across it. And I don't know how you first read it, but that exactly sums up the way that I encountered it. But when you think about a play like that and begin to, really invite educators to grapple with the realities of it, it's not, I think, just a story about young love, right? But the opening scene is very sexist. It's misogynistic. The two men are, imagining the feud between the two families in terms that are like, assaulting women, right? Sexual assault. And so this language comes up at the very opening of the play. It's there. And then we come to Romeo, and then we come to the moment that Romeo sees Juliet, right? And so already we're thinking about how the men are being positioned, what they think. typically his language is celebrated as, as something poetic and, imagining how beautiful she is. But even in the way he imagines Juliet, and this I think is something that it wasn't taught to me at least, and I know a lot of people that probably don't recognize this, but when he sees Juliet, the way he describes her beauty is like a rich diamond on an Ethiop's ear. And so the idea is that she is very white and bright as opposed to the dark skin of an Ethiopian. And then to emphasize that, he says, like a white dove trooping among black crows. And so, yeah, and it's probably like, like most people, that's not a moment where educators stop and contemplate that. And I don't think it has to be a moment that you say, now this defines a racism in, Romeo and Juliet, but to say, notice how there are nascent forms of imagining beauty aligned to whiteness, and what might that mean? And do we see that in our present moment? And then that's a conversation that you can have in a classroom where the cultural product that you have at hand here, right, is already perpetuating these ideas, and the way that we study them and either evade that topic or centralize that topic, I think is up to us. And I think personally, we should be centralizing that topic, at least for part of the conversation.
So that's exactly where I wanted to go. Thank you for bringing that up. Why is it important for educators to make the decision on occasion or often, depending on who you are, what your responsibilities are as an educator, what grade level you're in, what you're reading? Why should educators be making the decisions to occasionally have these conversations, have this dialogue with their students?
Yeah, I think personally, I think it's our ethical obligation to our students to have these conversations, to allow for them. I mean, if this is, literature as part of the humanities, and we're thinking about how we are conceiving of our relationships, right? Conceiving about how we think about different cultures and peoples and languages, right? This is a conversation we need to have, because if we're not recognizing how forms of racism came to be and how they persist, right? We are actually allowing for others to perpetuate particular myths and ideas about superiority that are in place. And this, unfortunately, is part of my field of study. The alt-right has mobilized in looking at medieval literature and culture as a kind of imagined past of white supremacy, right? And so there are a lot of scholars who are like that to think about the medieval period as being only white is laughable. I mean, you think about the global nature of, the world and what the medieval period looked like, across that world. It's not only white, right? And so, but that centrality, I think, is critical. I think this is something students, if we are simply, kind of feeding them and, perpetuating the idea of like Shakespeare's universality because of his genius, right? As opposed to Shakespeare's universality, maybe thinking about universal ways of racial hierarchies, right, that are being formed, is a disservice to them. And so I feel like this is the moment that students have where they can have honest conversations. They might not be able to have these at home. They might not be having these with their friends, right? And so it's a space for them to think critically about the world around them, because the harm is then those particular students, right, growing to believe in these racial hierarchies and, really adopting notions of white supremacy. And this is, I should be clear, like, this isn't aimed at white students, right? George Lipset says, not all white supremacists are white and not all whites are white supremacists, right? It's just the idea that if you begin to believe that whiteness is that which everybody should aspire to be, then there is something problematic, right? And then there is a sense of unbelonging. And talking about safety, right? Then there is a sense that certain students will not feel safe in the space of the classroom, in the space of the educational setting, their cities, and outward.
Ruben, something really beautiful. I know you've said so much that I know will resonate with our community here and really give some food for thought as educators are listening throughout their day today. But something I really value is the idea that if we as educators don't feel comfortable or don't even open the door to these conversations, then who will? And the assumption that these conversations are happening at home or happening with their friends or happening in their community unfortunately aren't promised. And while conversations about race and religion and diversity were happening in my household growing up, that doesn't mean that they're happening in everyone's household. And there's plenty of people that I'm sure, as we reflect, we engaged with people that had different upbringings, that didn't have the same diversity and cultural conversations, and seemed a little ignorant as we engage with them as adults, and we're like, wow, you haven't had that experience? Like, where did you grow up? Like the middle of nowhere? We've all had those encounters. So I love that you're highlighting the opportunity here and the responsibility here that educators have to really celebrate. And truly celebrate the opportunity that we have to highlight the diversity that we have in our world, and how different texts and different plays and different news outlets can give opportunities for our teachers to be able to do that in a very safe way.
Yeah, and I think that's right, and that's why I feel I'm immensely proud of the digital platform we've created in throughlinez.org. This offers viewers entry points to have these conversations. So if you feel uncomfortable and you just don't know where to begin, our goal with the website is to create as much content where you can go in and search, I'm teaching Hamlet this week. What are some entry points to thinking about race in Hamlet, which we might not think about race in Hamlet, right? And this will give them that opportunity, because I think that's right, and I feel, I'm always reminded of a friend of mine who ran the education portion of the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C. So it sits on Capitol Hill. Yeah, Peggy O'Brien. She just recently retired, but she's great. And in thinking about the Folger's role in that, I should mention they have, as part of their archives, a letter that the insurrectionists sent to them. It was kind of a heads up. We're going to be in your neighborhood. We don't mean to bother your institution. And the idea is that they value, right, what the Folger represents in terms of Shakespeare. But during that insurrection, Peggy said she was out, on her lawn and looking at the men marching by, and all that she could think of was, were your English teachers? And I love that sentiment, because she's not naive, I think she recognized that there are probably some English teachers in that group, marching toward the Capitol, but also recognizing the power of the humanities, right? What those educators have the power to do, and how to shape and transform lives, so that students don't feel like this is something that they should be going forward in doing, right? In overthrowing a government, right? In challenging our election system. And it felt like a lot put on the English educators, but I think, what I valued about that is the promise she saw in that. And we should, as you suggest, celebrate that promise and really encourage, these educators to go forward and to embark on this. And so it's not easy. And again, I think that was the whole idea behind our project, is to say, okay, it's not easy, but it's possible.
Yeah. So Ruben, we are going to obviously share your contact information here in just a bit, but before we transition, do you mind sharing the website again for our network here? I want to make sure we share it 100 times in this episode, and a quick summary about what they can expect when they log in.
Yeah, it's throughlinez.org, all one word, throughlinez, and then .org. And you can access it too through our website at acmrs.edu. But directly, it's a free resource, pedagogical resource, pedagogical tools. So it's aimed at higher education teachers. It does not mean that those teaching high school cannot find value in this. In fact, I think it would be a great resource for all educators. But the idea behind it is bringing together leading scholars in the field who talk about the way that they teach race, right? So when they teach X topic, right, this is how I talk about race. And so you have an array of video content. You also have exemplar syllabi. You have, kind of short essays that they've written, thinking about what close readings you might bring to the table when you teach. Also classroom assignments, right? Lesson plans that they've devised. And so I have to say, like, as somebody who, for the better part of my career has focused on critical race studies and that kind of field of scholarship, I thought I knew a lot, and I have learned so much through these scholars. So it's looking back at the pre-modern past. So it's all the way from the classics, right, all the way through to the early modern period, and even beyond. We have a scholar who looks at the Haitian Revolution, and so it's really rich, robust, and the great thing is it's constantly growing. So you should come back again. So we are actively working on adding more content for the foreseeable future, and so we're excited about it. We want this to be a dynamic, rich resource, and already it's proven to be. And I, anecdotally have heard from many who say, like, I changed my syllabus once I went on there, and kind of small things, topics that you think you know a lot about, and suddenly it's eye-opening in ways that will transform your teaching. And so that's our hope, that people will transform their teaching comfortably and feel safe doing so.
Outstanding. Stick with us, friends. We're going to highlight a key takeaway and make sure we share as many contact information elements as we can. We'll be wrapping up our conversation here with the key takeaway and, of course, contact information for our guest. Ruben, if you were to identify one key takeaway that you hope our listeners of the pod are able to walk away with from this episode, what comes to mind?
Well, I love your idea about celebrating the diversity of our society here, right? And honoring that. I think a key takeaway would be to honor that diversity by having these sometimes difficult conversations, right? But finding a way to do it and creating and fostering a space where the students feel welcome and comfortable talking about, issues that hit close to home for many of them. So good. So powerful. And how can our community stay connected to you? So I'm at ASU. You can always email me, Ruben.Espinosa with an S, ESPINOSA at asu.edu. Also visit our website, acmrs.edu. We have a lot of great programming in addition to the Throughline website that we've just developed. But most importantly, please do visit throughlines.org, share the link, and kind of spread the word, because I'm incredibly proud of what our team has put together. Our creative team, often describe themselves as 3 toddlers in a trench coat. They were new to this, and they have created something that is incredible. It's a really highly polished and an amazing resource. So, the idea is to make it free, accessible, and available to everybody. So powerful. And friends, of course, if you ever have any issues connecting with anybody here on the pod, you can reach out to me or anyone on the Teach Better team, and we'll get you connected. Ruben, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, sharing your insight. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Ray. Thanks for having me.